Imagine finding out that everything you thought you could count on, your family, your marriage, was actually built on deception. This is the story of one man's journey through a betrayal so deep that it unveils secrets never meant to be found. Get ready, this story will leave you in shock. Ben Thompson's home office was his sanctuary, the place he'd always retreated to, surrounded by the rich, dark wood of his walnut desk, neatly organized files, and walls decorated with awards and accolades from his career. This sense of order mirrored the life he thought he'd built, one that was stable and secure. But tonight, that carefully maintained structure seemed on the verge of collapse. Ben's gaze was fixed on the pile of bank statements spread across his desk, each page revealing truths he could no longer ignore. As the Seattle sunset cast warm, amber light across the room, the numbers on those statements, once ordinary, now appeared to hold a more ominous meaning. He drummed his fingers on the desk, a habit he'd picked up over his 26 years of marriage to his wife, Lydia. "Follow the money," he muttered, leaning forward to adjust his reading glasses. Their daughter Amy had always been sensible with money, or so Ben thought. But lately, her repeated pleas for help with unexpected expenses had formed a pattern he couldn't shake. Each request seemed reasonable enough: textbooks, lab fees, car repairs. Yet now, as he sifted through the statements, familiar patterns triggered an instinct he couldn't ignore. The silence was broken by the buzz of his phone. A message from Amy popped up. "Dad, sorry to bother, but there's a new course fee I need help with, $500. Could you transfer it tonight? It's urgent." Ben leaned back in his leather chair, the worn material creaking under his weight as he let out a slow breath. This request felt all too familiar, just like the last few, which had already added up to nearly $2,800 this month. His fingers hovered over the keyboard, ready to reply with the usual, "Of course. After all, that's what fathers do, right? They support, they provide, they trust." But tonight something made him pause. He picked up one of the bank statements and noted a series of charges from Seattle restaurants. The dates and times formed a pattern he could no longer dismiss. Thursday afternoon, 2:15 p.m., at Pacifico Bistro. The following Tuesday, 3:30 p.m., at Bella's Cafe. Amy was supposed to be in her sociology and finance classes at those times. A soft clicking of heels across the hardwood floor pulled Ben out of his thoughts. Lydia appeared in the doorway, her navy blue business suit still crisp after a long day at work, her wavy chestnut hair swept back. Her confident smile was the same one that had charmed him back in grad school. "Everything okay?" she asked, leaning against the doorframe. "You've been in here for hours." Ben kept his expression calm, gesturing to the papers scattered over his desk. "Just going over some financials. Amy's been asking for extra help lately, and I'm starting to worry." For a fleeting moment, a barely perceptible flicker crossed Lydia's face, her expression softening with something he couldn't quite place. She moved closer, her gentle floral perfume reaching him as she placed a well-manicured hand on his shoulder. "She's probably just going through a rough patch," Lydia reassured him, her tone smooth, radiating the same confidence she wielded in her job at the firm. "College is expensive these days, tuition, books, all those extra costs." "Funny you mention that," Ben replied, tapping his finger on a few highlighted lines on the statement. "Some of these expenses seem pretty high-end for a college student." His tone was light, but his gaze was steady on her face. Lydia's grip on his shoulder tightened slightly, just enough for Ben to notice. "Pacifico Bistro? Bella's Cafe?" he asked, his voice casual, though his eyes told a different story. "Not exactly the type of places a college kid on a budget would go to, don't you think?" Lydia's eyes flashed with a brief unease before she shrugged, just a bit too quickly. "Maybe she was out with friends. You know how kids are, they like to keep up appearances." Ben's gaze didn't waver. "During her class times?" A heavy pause followed. Lydia's composure faltered just for a second, but then she softened her tone. "Maybe she's stressed. We could talk to her about budgeting or maybe even meet some of these friends she's spending so much time with." Just then, Lydia's phone chimed. She glanced at the screen and quickly pocketed it, but not before Ben caught a name, Mark. Oh, it's just work, she said, already moving toward the door. A client crisis. You know how it is. Her smile was tight, her eyes avoiding his as she added, don't stay up too late worrying about all this. As soon as she left, Ben's eyes returned to the bank statements. He pulled up his banking app, scrolling through the transfers he'd sent to Amy's account. The amounts varied, but the frequency was unmistakable, too frequent, each under a different, almost plausible excuse. Ben switched to his laptop, digging deeper into his records, matching dates and amounts from the statements. Hours slipped by as he painstakingly sifted through each record, marking every questionable charge. Slowly, the puzzle pieces clicked into place, and the full picture made his head spin. There were dinners for two, hotel stays disguised under names that sounded vaguely academic, cash withdrawals aligning with supposed textbook purchases. Then he spotted it, a name that made his stomach turn. Mark Ellis. Lydia had mentioned him before, a new rising star at her firm, charismatic, ambitious, and very sociable. But why was his name appearing in Amy's expenses? No, Ben muttered, leaning back, the shock hitting him like a punch to the gut. His phone buzzed, shattering the silence. Another message from Amy appeared on the screen. Dad, please, it's due tonight. Ben's hands shook as he set his phone down, unable to bring himself to respond. The betrayal sank deeper than he'd expected. Suspecting Lydia was bad enough, but realizing his own daughter might be part of this web of lies. That hurt in a way he hadn't anticipated. Memories of Amy flooded his mind, teaching her to ride her first bike, staying up late to help her with college applications, beaming with pride at her graduation. He'd always believed he'd given her a stable foundation, a solid family she could trust. The next morning, Ben kept to his usual routine with exacting precision. He showered, put on his best suit, and kissed Lydia goodbye as she headed out for work. But every action felt hollow, his movements weighed down by a new, harsh reality. Lydia adjusted his tie, looking up at him with that bright smile he used to love. Dinner tonight? She asked. I might be working late with Mark, but I should be home by 8. Working late with Mark, he thought bitterly but forced a smile. I'll grab something from that Italian place downtown. You're the best, she murmured, pressing a light kiss to his cheek. Love you? The words cut deeper than she could know. Once at work, Ben made 3 crucial phone calls. The first was to his bank. This is Ben Thompson. I'd like to change the access on my accounts. Please remove all secondary permissions. And don't notify the other cardholders. The second was to his lawyer, Oliver Stein. Oliver, we need to meet today. No, it's urgent, about Lydia. I have some documentation I need you to go over right away. The third was to a private investigator Oliver had once recommended. I need surveillance on 2 people. Yes, I have their details. Photos, video, audio, whatever you can get. Money is no object. By noon, the groundwork was laid. Amy's credit cards were quietly deactivated, and access to the family's joint accounts was set to be restricted by day's end. The investigator would soon start collecting whatever evidence Ben needed to confirm what he already dreaded. When his phone buzzed with anxious messages from Amy. Dad, my card just got declined. Is something wrong? He replied quickly. Must be a system error. He knew it was just the beginning of many changes ahead. That evening, Amy showed up unannounced at the house. Ben watched from his office window as she rushed inside, worry playing on her face. She bypassed his office, heading straight to the kitchen, where Lydia was preparing dinner. Their voices, low but urgent, drifted up the stairs. Mom, everything's shut down, Amy whispered, panic clear in her voice. What if Dad finds out? What if he tracks everything? Lydia's voice was calm, though tension edged her words. Don't panic. We've been careful. I'll talk to Mark tomorrow. Let's just act normal for now. Ben clenched his fists, fury simmering just beneath the surface. He wanted to burst downstairs, demand answers on the spot. But he knew better than to act impulsively. They had deceived him for who knew how long, and now, he had to play this carefully. After Amy left, Ben made his way downstairs. Lydia was chopping vegetables, moving casually as if everything were perfectly normal. "Was that Amy?" he asked, keeping his tone even. Lydia froze for just a second, her knife pausing mid-chop. "Oh, yes," she said, recovering quickly. "She just stopped by to pick up some books." "Anything interesting?" he asked, crossing his arms and leaning against the counter. She hesitated, barely noticeable. "Just some materials for her classes." Then, almost too quickly, she added, "How was your day?" "Eventful," Ben replied, studying her closely as she shifted her stance. A subtle tension lingered in her posture as she resumed preparing dinner. Leaning casually against the counter, he kept his gaze fixed on her. "You know," he said lightly, "I was thinking we could plan a little weekend getaway soon. Maybe head to the Bella Vista Inn. You've always loved it there." Lydia's hand stilled for a moment, her expression faltering. The Bella Vista Inn wasn't just a random suggestion. Ben had seen charges for it in Amy's transactions, listed under vague terms like school expenses. Ben stepped up to the podium, his mind racing but his face composed. He could see Lydia standing near the back of the crowd, her eyes wide with anxiety. Mark stood beside her, glancing around nervously as he shifted uncomfortably. The room quieted, all eyes fixed on Ben as he cleared his throat and looked out over the sea of faces. "Good evening, everyone," he began, his voice steady and measured. "I am deeply honored to be here tonight, not only to support the Monroe Foundation but also to express my gratitude for the incredible work that everyone here does." He paused, letting the silence stretch, the weight of his words settling over the room. "In recent years, I've come to understand the importance of transparency, trust, and honesty, not just in business, but in our personal lives as well. These values are the foundation upon which we build our relationships, both personal and professional. And without them, we lose our way." Ben glanced down at the stack of papers he'd brought up with him. "I've spent years trusting in those values, believing that they were shared. And yet, trust, once broken, can reveal truths we often wish had stayed hidden." He held up the papers, letting the audience see the official headers of the documents in his hands. "Tonight, I'd like to make a special announcement, one that impacts not only myself but also the person who was supposed to be my partner in everything, my wife, Lydia." A ripple of shocked whispers flowed through the crowd. Ben met Lydia's gaze, her face pale, her eyes pleading. But he felt no sympathy. This was her moment of reckoning, and he intended to see it through. "These documents," he continued, "are the culmination of months of investigation, a hard look into the reality behind the facade of a marriage that, until recently, I thought was built on loyalty and love." He allowed his gaze to sweep over Lydia and Mark, who both now looked as if they wished they could disappear into the floor. "But what I found was a deception, a betrayal by the two people I trusted most. It is both personal and devastating, yet necessary to bring into the light." The room was silent, tension hanging heavy in the air. Ben placed the papers back on the podium, his hands steady. "Tonight I am announcing the beginning of a new chapter in my life, one free from deceit. Lydia and I will no longer be together, and to those of you who respected our marriage, I apologize for the pretense that has masked the reality of our situation." With that, he nodded to Patricia Monroe, who looked as stunned as the rest of the audience, her professional composure momentarily shaken. "Thank you all for your time and for your support," he concluded, stepping down from the podium. As he made his way back through the crowd, people parted in silence, their stunned faces watching him in disbelief. He passed Lydia, who reached out to stop him, her face etched with panic. "Ben, please," she whispered, her voice choked. "Let's talk about this." He met her gaze, his eyes cold and unyielding. "We're well past talking, Lydia." He walked past her without another word, his heart pounding with a mixture of triumph and sorrow. There was no going back, but for the first time in a long while, he felt a strange sense of relief. The truth was out, and he was free to rebuild, this time on a foundation that he could trust. Ben hesitated, staring at the screen as Amy's number flashed. He felt the weight of everything that had happened bearing down on him. Part of him wanted to ignore the call, to distance himself from the pain and betrayal. But another part of him, the part that had once been a devoted father, couldn't just let go without hearing what she had to say. With a deep breath, he answered, keeping his tone as steady as he could. "Yes, Amy? Dad, please, I know I messed up." Amy's voice was barely a whisper, thick with remorse. "I don't expect you to forgive me right away. I need you to understand. I was scared. I thought Mom would be in serious trouble, and she told me this was the only way to help." Ben sighed, feeling a mix of frustration and sadness welling up. "Amy, you were old enough to know right from wrong. You knew lying to me, using my money for her cover-ups, was a betrayal. And you didn't just do it once. You kept doing it, over and over, as if I'd never find out." "I know," she sobbed, her voice breaking. I thought if I just kept it hidden, it would all go away somehow. I thought maybe if I didn't get involved too much, it would be okay. But you were involved, Amy. Whether you wanted to be or not, you chose to keep secrets. And because of that, you have to face the consequences now." There was a long silence, broken only by Amy's shaky breaths on the other end of the line. "Dad, I don't have anyone else to turn to. I know you're angry, and I know I deserve it. But I'm asking, begging, you to give me a chance to make it up to you." Ben closed his eyes, torn. Amy was his daughter, but the choices she had made were her own, and they had brought them to this point. "I'll think about it, Amy," he finally said, his voice quieter. "But understand that trust isn't something that can just be restored with a few apologies. I need to see you taking responsibility, not just looking for forgiveness." "Thank you, Dad," she whispered. "Thank you for even listening." He ended the call, feeling the faintest sliver of hope amidst the ache. Amy had reached out, and maybe, just maybe, there was a chance for her to redeem herself, though it would take time and effort. Over the next few weeks, the fallout from Lydia and Mark's scandal continued to ripple through the legal community. With their reputations tarnished and professional futures uncertain, they faded from public life. Amy began sending Ben updates, small steps she was taking to rebuild her life independently, taking on a part-time job, applying for financial aid, working to repair the damage. She didn't ask him for money or favors, only kept him informed, showing him she was trying to grow. And slowly, Ben felt his anger start to ebb. He wasn't sure he would ever fully forgive, but he was ready to rebuild. It was a process that would require more resilience than he had ever expected, but for his own sake, he was determined to move forward, one step at a time. As the story concludes, Ben's journey reflects the heavy toll of betrayal and the resolve needed to stand firm in the face of immense personal loss. In choosing to confront Lydia and Amy's deception, Ben not only reclaims control of his life but also redefines his own values and boundaries. This story starkly illustrates that trust, once broken, cannot easily be mended, and it highlights the consequences that unfold when honesty is compromised. Ben's actions might seem harsh, but they reflect the painful reality of healing from betrayal. For Amy, his firm response opens a door to redemption, albeit with hard lessons. For Lydia and Mark, the fallout is more severe, as they face professional and personal repercussions. Ben's closing moment, standing alone with a glass of wine, gazing out at the city, evokes a sense of bittersweet victory. He's lost family and comfort, yet he's gained a renewed sense of integrity and peace. This ending leaves readers contemplating the complexities of forgiveness, the strength needed to set boundaries, and the bittersweet nature of reclaiming one's life after betrayal. Friends, share your thoughts. Do you think Ben's approach to healing and moving forward was justifiable? Or should he have handled things differently? Let's discuss in the comments.